we address a very important issue in cultural anthropology, namely the whole topic of social systems and the problem of inequality. Our topic tonight is going to take us through three very distinct areas of discussion. Number one, maintaining stable societies. How do we maintain the organization of our culture group? Then we're going to talk about types of social system, the manner in which various social groupings have organized the society in order to maintain its integrity and stability. And then we're going to talk about the effects of globalization, the impact of cultures as they come in contact in an extensive manner in contemporary global society, if you would. I remind you again then of this circle that we've been talking about. We are looking now at the one on the very bottom, social systems. We're going to be talking about egalitarian, ranked, and stratified societies. And we are slowly moving ourselves around this circle, ultimately to conclude in a couple of weeks from now. The topic that we first want to address is this whole matter of maintaining a stable society. And in addressing this question, we want to ask the question, what is it that keeps us as a people living in a somewhat harmonious kind of social setting? What is it that keeps us functioning with some semblance of unity and integrity and togetherness? What is it that keeps us motivated? Let me give you an example of the kind of thing that we want to talk about tonight. You are here at the university. You are paying mega bucks to take this course tonight. What are we, about $600 a unit at the university, and so that's 1,800 bucks you've paid to be in this course. I mean, that's atrocious to think about, but you're paying, or if you're not paying it, your parents are paying it. And oh, I hate to think about it. I mean, what do we have? 15 lectures in this course, and you're paying 1,800 bucks. That means you're paying more than 100 bucks just to sit here tonight and listen to this lecture. Is it really worth it? Don't put the camera on them. I don't want them, all those head shaking, no. See, the whole question is, you know, is an education worth it? I mean, that's just one class. You've got to take how many of them to get through with a BA degree? Is a BA really worth going into debt $20,000? Because that's what most of you are going to go into debt trying to get through this program. The average Biola student graduates with a $20,000 debt over and above all the other monies that they were able to raise. So your parents are pulling money together, you're pulling money together, you're getting money from the government, you're getting money from scholarships, and you're going into Hawk at the rate of about $20,000. Is it worth it? What motivates you to come to Biola to get a college degree? You're going to have to lose sleep. You're going to have to suffer. You're going to have to give up 4 years of your life or more. And you're going to have to go into financial, serious hardship. And yet here you are, smiling, happy, excited, and engaging in this rigorous course of study in order to get whatever it is that you get. A little slip of paper that cost a nickel plus printing cost, see? Signed by President Cook and Company. See? Now, was it worth it? What is it that keeps you motivated when you're going home in 3 or 4 weeks? What's going to make you want to come back next year, assuming that you're not graduating? What's going to motivate you to come back? Somehow or another, you need to be motivated to want to come back, to want to go through all of this, to want to expend all these major bucks, to expend all this time and energy. Society has to make some promises to you. Or somehow or another, we have to make it worth all of the expenditure and the effort that you're putting into it. Now, that's just one example. How do we get people to obey certain kinds of unwritten social laws? I'm wearing this tie. What pressures are on me to wear a tie? You will be motivated to buy a certain kind of vehicle. What drives you to buy a certain kind of vehicle? Is there anything, does anything with four wheels work for you? Now, my daughter, living out in Palm Desert, needed a vehicle. We bought her a nice little Volkswagen, all rebuilt, and she immediately drove it into the ground, you know. So she needed a new vehicle. So she got rid of that, and she didn't get as much money for it as she had hoped to get. So she had to buy down. And she bought this old VW station wagon. I didn't even know VW made a station wagon. It's a junky car. And the guy that sold it to her says, I know that this kind of car is not a car appropriate for a young lady. But since it's all you can afford, it's good sound mechanical car, go ahead and take it. And my daughter bought it, and she drives around this junky old car. And she feels, like she doesn't want anybody to see her in that car. I mean, after all, who drives junky old station wagon made by Volkswagen? You'd rather have a, you know, Mustang. Or a, well, who cares? You know, you want one of those sporty little cars. Now, what are the things that hold us as a society together? That's kind of what we want to talk about today. And frankly, our social institutions have been formulated for the specific purpose, I'll get it out yet, for the take that thing out of my mouth, for the specific purpose of helping you to become socialized. How do they do this? First of all, they are going to teach you shared values. See? We need to learn the shared values that make us a culture. We also then have to have a shared set of goals. If we're going to work together as a people, as a nation, as a culture group, we have to have shared values, shared goals, and then we have to have still a third component, namely the sharing of our efforts. See, we are going to agree that this is a worthwhile goal, that these are worthwhile values, and we're willing to expend energy jointly in the attainment of those goals and in the preservation of those values. Okay. Now, we don't consciously put this out there, see, but that's part of what it means to be a member of a particular culture. Now, when I was examining, for instance, the nature of Donny culture, and they had some shared values. One of the shared values was that they would insist that children be spaced at least 3 to 5 years apart. That a man would not get his wife pregnant until their child was at least 3 years of age or older. And so, any man, see, who had a child or got his wife pregnant, see, when his first child or younger child was still breastfeeding, see, and they breastfed up to the age of 3, he was put under incredible pressures. He was discriminated against. He was gossiped about. He was dropped from positions of leadership. People ridiculed his name. He was made a social outcast, if you would. And when they discovered that the next tribe down to the west of us was a tribe that had children in fairly rapid succession. They said, oh, those people are absolute animals. They don't love their children. They don't know how to respect their wives. They have kids just like animals do. See? And they called them animals, and they called anybody in their own culture, see, animals who did not behave like sophisticated human beings, namely spacing children, see, in nice 3 to 5 year increments. Well, that's just one value system that was important to this people. Well, having talked about the system of social organization and the goals, what we need to talk about are the types now of social institutions that generally emerge within cultures that will help to attain those goals. And one of the most common social system or social institution is encapsulated in what we call the schools. Now, not every culture has schools, but every culture has some kind of an educational system. And so whether they are actually informal schools or whether they are simply learning through the telling of tribal stories, through initiation procedures, or through informal educational systems, there nevertheless is some kind of an educational system in which people are taught the values and goals and the benefits of social effort. Now, in our culture, which does have a formal school system, what is one of our objectives? Our objective is to teach our values, our goals, and the skills that will help you to function in this society. Now, we run into some problems on this, because how do we teach values in a multicultural society? And this has become a significant problem in the American school system. And so for a while, we tried not to teach values, only to discover that if we didn't teach values, we were teaching people the unimportance of values, and we started getting all kinds of culture conflict. We started getting people who were unwilling to accept the rules and regulations by which we live as a people. And so they've had to bring values back into the school system. And they have whole seminars on how to teach values, because they recognize that this is an important issue in our school system. They also had to share or teach the goals of our society, and as a matter of fact, the appropriate goals for our society. And one of the things that happens, and this is all often part of the hidden curriculum, see, the hidden curriculum of our society. What motivates us to stay in school? What motivates us to learn the material that is being taught to us? Now, there was an interesting article in the Orange County Register just on Sunday, and it raised the question, why do Japanese children do better on standardized tests than American children? And they do. I mean, they outperform American students very, very dramatically. We come in at the very bottom of the list on standardized tests because in our educational system, we do not believe that we should teach the standardized tests. We believe that we should teach for problem solving, for use. Japanese educational system, forget about that. Let's learn to meet the standardized requirements. And in the process, the application will become self-evident. And so they learn all of these skills and all these techniques for being able to take standardized tests. So they outperform Americans every time. Now, that's one of their goals, see, is to meet the standardized test requirements, because standardized tests are what determines whether you get to go to college, whether you get into the prestigious schools, whether you get into certain occupations or jobs. If you don't perform well on standardized tests, you don't get into these institutions. Now, because that becomes a goal in and of itself, see, the schools teach to that, and they teach the skills that are necessary for it. Well, schools, see, we establish what are appropriate goals and values and skills to be learned, and students learn in that context. In government, another one of those social institutions, we have the objective of enforcing shared behaviors. Now, what is involved here? Try running a stop sign. See? And government will enforce behavior that we think is acceptable. Try going over the speed limit. See? Or, because we passed a new law here in California, whereby if a school bus stops and picks up students and it's got both lights flashing, you cannot go past that bus. You must stop. And there are, by the time I come to school, there are lots of these buses plying the streets of my community, picking up kids. And on some of the busiest streets, it's very interesting to watch where these buses stop to pick up kids. Because just a half a block down, here's an officer sitting there on his motorbike waiting for somebody to run right past that bus. See? And he's nailing people all the time. See? He's enforcing what we consider to be the acceptable and shared behaviors of our culture. And we have a whole legal system, we have courts and everything that work to this end. We also have business institutions. And the business and economic institutions of our country seek to reward those who are meeting the expectations of our society. Now, if you want to have long hair, and you want to wear earrings in your ear, and if you want to wear scruffy clothes, there is a place in our society for you. And that's probably not going to be as a lawyer, in the courts, on the police force. I mean, unless you want to go as an undercover narc. It's not going to be in the medical establishment. You're going to have to dress in certain kinds of appropriate ways if you're going to get into certain kinds of establishments. And if you want to have long hair, scruffy clothes, earrings, beards, all the rest, go ahead and be a carpenter or a construction worker or a truck driver. I did a very interesting thing one time. I came home from being overseas 4 years as a missionary, and I had grown a beard as part of being overseas. And that the Donnies loved it. Oh man, that beard's great, because beards were in. So I came home with a beard. And now I'm supposed to preach in the pulpit with a beard. And I'm supposed to represent the gospel in missionary meetings all around the country. And I got a beard. You know what? I got some very interesting looks. I don't know what kind of looks you get having this little goatee of yours. It's probably acceptable. What I discovered was that certain kinds of people are exempted from the normal rules that we have to be clean-shaven. And the people who are exempted from the rules of clean-shaven are students, see, because they're still learning the rules of society, and teachers, because they work with marginal peoples, and so they can be marginal. They can imitate the behavior of those that they are working with. And people who don't care about their social status, see, truck drivers, all the like, and certain kinds of socially marginal people, like computer nerds, or scientists who have got their heads so far in the clouds they don't have their feet on the ground. We give certain kinds of social exemptions to people, but you know what? We marginalize people in our society who have beards, with one exception: psychologists. Psychologists can have beards because, I mean, after all, they're weird anyway, you know, stroking their chin and looking at you with their little beady eyes saying, tell me about your mother, you know. And anybody who wants to spend a whole lifetime sitting in a little dark room asking people about their mothers, see, he can have a beard, see, because he's marginal anyway. Well, you know, my beard lasted about 3 months, and I realized, you know what, people are having questions about me. It's time to shave this thing off. So I shaved it off, and all of a sudden I was accepted back into the mainstream of society. Well, business, see, we reward people for meeting social expectations. And religion becomes a major part of this whole social institution phenomenon by integrating spiritual motivation for appropriate behaviors. Now, all of these are going to function to somehow get us to walking in harmony with the rest of the members of our culture. And that's the whole point of what we're talking about. How do we get a new generation of people, those cute little lovable babies that are being born this year, are going to turn into anarchic, anti-social terrors in the next couple of years. See, they're going to go through the terrible twos, see, or is it the terrible threes, or is it terrible twos and threes? I mean, they're going to go through all. They're going to challenge every rule of society, and we are just one generation from becoming a chaotic society if we don't somehow or another train that new generation of children into the social acceptable behaviors of our culture. Somehow or another, we have to enculturate them. How do we go about doing that? Well, we do go about doing it by having a system of rewards and punishments. In other words, we're going to reward desirable behaviors. And we're going to punish undesirable behaviors. Now, how do we reward desirable behaviors? Well, there are a number of ways that we can do this. We can give them monetary compensation for doing what we want them to do. So, we give good salaries to people who do what we want them to do. And here you are, at Biola, working on your degrees, Bachelor of Arts or Master's degree. Why? Because you've been told that with a college degree, you're going to get a better paying job. When you graduate from here, the world is going to be your oyster. See? You're going to be able to go out and those folk who dropped out of, well, they graduated from high school. And they said, hey, I'm not going on. See, I've had it. I'm done. No more schooling for me. I mean, they've already got a 4-year head start on you in the work world. But you're going to jump into the work world, and within 4 or 5 years, you're going to be light years ahead of them, salary-wise. That's the promise. And we have people who regularly keep track of this to prove to you that your college education is worth it, that you will get better paying jobs, end up far more successful in life, and you'll have the better jobs. Now, I graduated from high school back in back before Elvis was king. Let's go back that far. I graduated from high school before Elvis was king. And I had chosen to go on to college. See? Now I wanted to be a missionary. You can't be a missionary and do the kinds of things I wanted to do with only high school education. I needed a Bible school training. I needed some advanced theology. I needed a bachelor's degree. So I decided to go on to college. My very best buddy in high school said, hey, I don't want to go on to school. High school is plenty enough for me. So he went to work for Chevron Oil, filling tankers. Now, there's nothing wrong with filling tankers, you know. He was filling tanker trucks with petroleum, and I came back from my first year of college broke, looking for money, trying to get back for a second year, and this guy was hauling down megabucks. But the next year, he fell off one of those tankers and broke his wrist. See? And now, while he got unemployment compensation, he's got to go through life with a crippled wrist and no training. See? Now, if I broke a wrist, I may not be able to wave as much, but you know, I would still be able to carry on my job. There's a whole lot more job security for me than there was for him, because all he had to sell was his brute strength. See? He didn't have mental skills to sell. For some of us, mental skills gives us a little bit of a better working environment. And that's what we promise to you, see. We promise wealth to you. The second thing that we can promise to you, if you will do what the culture asks you to do, see, is power. Give you power. Give you authority. See, give you positions of leadership. So now you've got money, or at least the promise of money. Now you've got the possibility of being a leader, of having authority, of not having to just be at the bottom of the pecking order, not be simply someone who, get me a cup of coffee, sweetie. See? Excuse me, nobody calls me sweetie. See? I'm your boss. You are granted that power. And the third reward that a culture will give to people who perform well, to the expectations, to the shared goals, values, and needs of the society is prestige. We'll give you prestige. Now, we don't always give every one of these to everybody. Now, teachers. Teachers provide an invaluable service. They're the ones that spend 6 to 8 hours a day with all of those little anarchist, chaotic, potentially destructive urchins. 20 to 30 of them in their class, tearing things apart. See? And somehow they've got to civilize them. And they're doing a marvelous job. See? They are inculcating them with the skills that they need to function in our society. They are teaching them to take their turn, to raise their hands, to not talk, to not punch, to not be antisocial. See? They're doing all of these things. I mean, my wife teaches first grade, and she got that whole list. See? Classroom rules. See? The first rule, one at a time. Second, raise your hand. Third, and on and on and down. All these things to help them to live amiably in the classroom. Now, that's part of what school's all about now. And she's doing a magnificent job. But what's she getting paid? She's getting paid at the very lowest levels of middle-class society. I mean, she's being paid atrociously low salary, as are all teachers. See? We pay our teachers very low salaries. They ought to be getting 10 times what they're getting, but we can't afford it. Well, at least we keep telling ourselves we can't afford it. So what do we give teachers instead of wealth? Well, we don't give them power. Hey. What we give them instead is prestige. Oh, isn't being a teacher a wonderful job? So we grant them prestige. Teaching is one of those prestigious jobs. You want to know what another job is that's a necessary job, but is lousy pay? See, nurses. Nurses. I mean, could we live without nurses? No. They provide a valuable service, but they get lousy pay. But we give them marvelous prestige. Oh, yes, nursing, that's a great profession. Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm so proud of you. You're a nurse. See? And you can sell, your social status. Oh, yes, well, I'm a nurse. Oh, well, that's nice. See? Well, what are you? I'm a teacher. Oh, isn't that nice? What are you? I'm a mechanic. Oh, mechanics? See, we don't reward mechanics with power or prestige. A mechanic's a mechanic, So what do mechanics have to do to make up for it? They have to charge you $40 an hour in order to make it worthwhile, because they don't get much power and prestige. They got to have money. And for some folk, we managed to put this all together. See, like lawyers. See, we give them wealth. I don't know. Much prestige in being a lawyer? Well, yeah, there is, even though we make fun of them. We're really kind of scared of them. So we grant them some prestige, we grant them some wealth, and ultimately we grant them power, because they're the ones that become then politicians, leaders in government, and they're the ones that start hogging all of this stuff to themselves. Now, for some of us, all of this doesn't matter. We don't care about wealth, power, and prestige. We just want to be ourselves. See? And if we vary too much from the norms that are required of us, these things will actually be denied to us. Now, just to give you a kind of an interesting little vignette, I happen to be an ordained minister, all right? I've got a reverend in front of my name, Reverend Douglas Hayward, see? Now, do we pay our pastors very good salaries? Nah. I mean, it's looking better for some of the megachurch pastors and some of the television evangelists. Well, don't even talk to me about them. But the normal pastor, I mean, he's slopping along on the same salary as a school teacher. So what do? We grant them prestige. So I have all of the prestige that goes with being Reverend Douglas Hayward. See? And I can walk into moneyed establishments. I can walk into high-class society. Who are you? The Reverend Douglas Hayward. Oh, yes, well, welcome, Reverend. You know. See, because even though I'm dirt poor, I'm welcome in high society. See, I get the rewards of high society because I'm a reverend. Now, throw onto that the fact that I'm not only a reverend, see, I am Reverend Doctor, see, because I got a Ph.D. See, and even though we don't pay Ph.D.s very much, we give them lots of prestige. Oh my goodness, you must be very bright. Oh, I am, sort of, you know. Very bright. And so now, see, I've got double prestige, Reverend Dr. Douglas Hayward. See? And this became very evident to me when I went to a wedding up in San Francisco. See? And it was a very, very high-powered family, see, that was getting married. And we showed up there. And my wife and I knew that moving into this kind of strata of society, I didn't dare come with my dusty old suit. You know, I needed to have a brand new, so I went down, bought me a brand new pinstripe suit. Never had a pinstripe suit in my life, but I decided if I'm going to hobnob with bankers, I need a pinstripe suit. So I got me a nice pinstripe suit. My wife, you know, she maxed out our credit card and went and bought herself a nice, you know, designer gown. And so we showed up, you know, at this very prestigious wedding in San Francisco. And we were introduced, the Reverend Dr. Douglas Hayward, see, along with Mrs. Hayward, you know. Oh, yes, oh, well, you know, welcome and all this sort of stuff. And we started talking, and one of these San Francisco bankers come up to me and say, oh, yes, do you know Bishop so-and-so? No, don't think I know Bishop so-and-so. You never played golf with Bishop so-and-so? Wow, I don't play golf. I mean, that's a rich man's sport, you know? You got to pay to get out of those greens, you know? I always did the things that kids could do on the cheap, you know? Kickball in the streets and you know, at the very best, tennis, where I could do it on the high school lot. Now I haven't ever played golf with the bishop here in San Francisco. Well, I'm sure you'll meet him one of these days. That's not even my circle. I don't hobnob with bishops. Bishops don't want anything to do with a lowly old Baptist reverend, you know. But they were convinced that, you see, I must be part of high society because I've got this double prestige, reverend, doctor. Now, see, that's how we reward society. See? We reward people. And I use these just as a few examples of how society will try to get you to do what they expect you to do. Now, here on the Biola campus, can we use one more illustration before we go on to what's happening? You have a way of affirming and rewarding one another. Now, here you are, you're at Biola, and most of you are going to be middle-class families. Some of you a little lower down, some of you a little higher up, but most of you are going to be middle class. And so you are here, and your parents have sent you here, or you've come here, because it's a good place to learn the skills that you need to function in society. It's a good environment in which to do it. See, your parents sent you here because it's a nice Christian environment. You are going to learn to be socialized in Christian values. You're going to be socialized in the skills that are necessary for your careers, and hopefully while you're here, you're going to meet a Mr. somebody or a Miss somebody who will be a partner for life. And they will also be your social peer, see? I mean, after all, if you're looking for a husband or a wife, you're not going to find them down in South Central Los Angeles at the rescue mission. Okay? You're going to find them here gathered in your classrooms with you. Well, one of the things now that's going to be involved in your lives now is a certain kind of dating process. See? And so you're starting to date, and you're beginning to socialize a little bit. And what do? You, gals, guys too, but you gals, have a way of looking at one another's dress and say, oh, isn't that a lovely dress? Oh, I really like that outfit. Or, boy, I really like your tie. Or, boy, that's a great sweater you're wearing, Hayward. I mean, we have a way of complimenting one another on clothes. Why are we complimenting one another on the clothes that we wear? It's a way of affirming that you have good fashion consciousness on your clothes. But what happens if we come with something that's a little bit tacky? The old negative rewards kicks in. Where'd you get that? At the thrift shop? Or did you see what she's wearing? Boy, talk about missionary barrel stuff. Oh my goodness. Or those things don't go together. Oh my goodness. And so we begin criticizing one another on the clothes that we wear, on the behaviors that we're involved in. But you know what she did? Can you imagine how he played on the field today? He hogged the ball the whole time. Well, we're not going to let him play with us anymore. And so we start criticizing behaviors in addition to our clothing. And then we start criticizing or challenging our friendships. You accepted a date with who? Oh, I can't believe it. You can do better than that. I mean, do they say things like that in the dorms? Well, they do. I know they do. You don't have to nod. They do. You can do better than that. I mean, because I had a guy that I was dating a gal. And he told me, he said, Hayward, what do you think of this gal? Come on, I'm an old man. I don't look at women anymore. And I said, well, why do you ask me? He said, well, because my friends all tell me I can do better than her. Well, what's the matter with her? Well, she's a little bit chunky. She's an art major. Doesn't have too much to do with fixing herself up. I mean, she's kind of the artsy airhead type. But she's a really sweet girl. I said, well, and that's what counts, isn't it? Not according to my friends. See? They were putting pressure on him to date higher. And your friends are going to put pressure on you to date at least on your own social level or a little bit higher. And we put these kinds of tremendous pressures on one another as part of the whole socialization process. And my daughter picked this up very, very keenly when she came back for junior high school. Came into junior high school as a total foreigner to this culture. She had grown up overseas, did not have the foggiest clue how you were to act in an American culture. And junior high is the age in which you get really, really nasty about this. I mean, they haven't developed the skills to teach you how to socialize without condemning you. And so she'd been taught that she was to be kind and considerate to all people. And so she was. She was particularly thoughtful and kind and helpful to students in her classroom who were either physically disabled or who were intellectually, mentally challenged, who had learning disabilities. And so she was kind, and she would even play with them. Some of the other students would be ostracized. She would go out and play with them. And the students in her classroom noticed that she was making friends of these socially marginal students. And one of her classmates said to her, "Is there something the matter with you?" And my daughter said, no, I don't think so. Why? And they said, why do you hang around all of these weirdos? Now, that should have been a signal to my daughter. Break off relationships, hang out only with the socially acceptable normies, if we can call them that, and not to associate anymore with these. And instead, she came home absolutely devastated. And you know what she said? She said, is there anything wrong with me? She said, here I am, trying to be friends to these people who are struggling with life, and the rest of the kids are rejecting me now and won't be friends with me. You see? They were beginning to force her into acceptable patterns of behavior that would make them affirm the strengths of the culture and the values of the culture. See? And the values of the culture did not happen to be consistent with her own Christian values. Well, we went back to the field, and when we came back, she came back into high school, and the same kind of pressure came on her. See? She tried to witness to a young man who was in serious trouble with juvenile hall, and so she was trying to share the gospel with him, trying to get him to come to church. And she was sitting there with a group of her girlfriends in high school when this guy came up and said, can I sit down and join you? And so she said, sure. And as soon as he sat down, the other three girls got up and walked away. Now that's how we reward appropriate behaviors. They were sending her a strong message. If you want to fellowship, associate with the likes of him, you're not one of us. Well, these are the kinds of things that happen in every culture to get us to want to agree to the rules and regulations and the norms of that society. Now, there are some very distinctive types of social systems that we want to talk about. And we want to talk about egalitarian societies, ranked societies, stratified societies, and in stratified societies we want to talk about caste and class. Because in each one of these social systems, the manner in which rewards and punishments, the manner in which behavior is regulated and guarded, the manner in which people are brought into conformity with the standards of the society are going to be differentially indicated. So let's talk about egalitarian social systems. When we talk about the egalitarian social system, let's look at some of the characteristics associated with it. Wealth. Wealth, we said, was one of those rewards. Wealth is what we call leveled. You do not have great disparities of wealth. You do not have wealth as a means whereby people can be controlled. You see, because in egalitarian societies, land is not owned exclusively. It is usually communally owned. Food is a shared commodity. You eat together. You take care of one another. Furthermore, in egalitarian societies, material goods are very minimal. As a consequence, wealth is not a powerful factor in getting people to obey the rules and regulations and standards, the values and the goals of the culture. What should we do? Well, in that kind of society, wealth will often be given away in exchange for prestige, because prestige is something that they can grant. So wealth is a very weak motivation in egalitarian societies. What about power? Well, power comes by influence. It's something that you have to be able to accrue to yourself through demonstrated abilities. And people are not able to be coerced. And so power is not something that you can use that will become, again, a major motivational factor in egalitarian societies. So the only thing that is left to motivate somebody in egalitarian societies is prestige. And prestige can be earned. It can be accumulated. And the more prestige you get, then the more people that will be willing to follow you, which grants you more power. And since wealth is not something that is granted in abundant numbers, the only thing that can be granted to you, see, are some of the resources of the community, which may very well be that you are granted the right to additional wives. And this is why polygamy, see, functions so powerfully in some societies. It is a way of rewarding the most productive members of the society. So, egalitarian societies, very little motivation apart from prestige. So, what do we then do if we want to have a negative, a punishment, a system of punishment for these people? Well, how do you punish people in an egalitarian society? You send them into exile. You ostracize them. You tell them they're not wanted in your group. So you send them away. I went into one valley high up in the mountains in Irian Jaya. And I said, who were the first people that came into this valley and began to build their farms up here? It was a group of people who had been exiled because of running contrary to the regulations and expectations of the particular community they were in. They were chased out, literally, and found themselves having to build new homes in this region. The other approach that you can use is you can actually use physical force. You can attack them. You can shoot them. You can kill them. And indeed, this is one of the major threats in any society, even band-level societies that are supposed to be so peaceful and so lacking in violence. Violence is always a possible solution to people who refuse to abide by the rules and regulations of the society. Now, when the first settlers came to the United States, by the way, exile and ostracism was one of the characteristics of enforcing the rules of the community. And the Puritans had a very rigid system of punishments. They would lock you in the stocks, see, and kids could throw tomatoes and other things at you, see, and you would be publicly humiliated. And if public humiliation didn't work, you know what their ultimate threat was? Leave. Leave and go into the wilderness. And that's how the first Baptist, pardon me for showing up a little Baptist history here, but that's how the first Baptists were treated by the Puritans. They were told, you're not wanted in our community. You are not acceptable to us. And so they were driven off into the wilderness and started their own communities. Now, fortunately, they survived. A lot of folk did not. And the fear of ostracism, see, was a powerful force for people wanting to obey the rules of society. Well, not all societies are egalitarian. Some are what we call ranked. And in ranked societies, you have a royal class, or you have a privileged class, and you have a group of people who are commoners. This would be the kind of system, for instance, that you find in English society, where you have nobility and you have commoners. And when you have such a system, there are a fixed number of social positions. Not everybody gets to be into that category. A few people may be inducted into it, but only a few every year. And every year, the Queen will give knighthood to certain kinds of people. And from now on, when you've been knighted, everybody must call you Sir. Now, wouldn't that be wonderful? Sir Reverend Dr. Douglas Hayward. Well, I don't know. Would it be Reverend Dr. Sir? No, I think Sir comes for, who knows? Who cares? I can't be knighted. because I'm an American. And if I got knighted, I'd have to give up my American citizenship in order to go to England, in order to be able to carry my title. But that's the rank system. And it is fixed by birth, by lineage, or by royal decree. So you're either born into a noble family, or you are noble by your lineage, or you get to be newly knighted. And the Beatles were knighted. Okay. They were knighted because of their contributions to British society. Well, this will determine, see, certain social benefits and rewards. You get to be members of certain kinds of clubs. You get to be into certain establishments. You get to have access to certain kinds of associations. You get to have certain kinds of privileges. There are certain benefits that come with that rank. Among these are going to be prestige. There's a great deal of prestige that goes with having a noble lineage. You have the right to rule, so you can be in the House of Lords. And you will have access to wealth. Now, usually that will be through some kind of inheritance, because oftentimes this will become a matter of land that has been given to you, or some kind of family wealth that will pass to you. So you can have the landed estates, see, that goes with your family's inheritance. Now, how do rank societies treat dissidents? Okay. And so the treatment of dissidents, then, people who do not live according to their rank, see, will lose their rank, see, or they will lose their power. Now, how many of you have been to see the Titanic? I should think most all of you have. Okay, here was a movie that plays very, very heavily upon the whole issue of rank and status. Okay. There were the upper decks for the nobility or for the wealthy. Okay. And down in the lower levels, see, were the commoners, my kind of people. See, the folk who slept in very crowded quarters, who had a commons room. Okay. None of this dining with the captain, none of this dancing stuff. I mean, they could do it, but they had to do it with their own music. There was no band prepared for them. And so you get this strong class kind of a thing. Now, who was the American woman on that boat that was in the upper echelon, who was in the upper class, but who was disdained by the other members of the crews?
Molly Brown.
Molly Brown, the unsinkable Molly Brown. See, newly wealthy, see, came into a very large portion of money as a result of the gold fields. And look at the way they disdained her. Woman doesn't know how to act. She's new money versus old money, see. Now, these are the kinds of things that happen in ranked societies. And one of the things that we determined when we established the United States Charter, the United States government, was rank will not be allowed to take place in this country. So we made it illegal for anybody to go by the name of Sir. Or at least if they went by it, it was only honorific. Now, Sir William Johnson was the first member of the United States government to become, well, one of the first. He may have been the first, but at least one of the first, who was Commissioner of Indian Affairs. See? And everybody knows him by Sir William Johnson, see? Because it was still the transition period. But you remember, George Washington said, look, I will not be king. And he got on his horse and he rode home. And they had to establish very early in the history of this country that rank would not be a factor in social organization, that people would be given equal chance to all of the privileges and the rights of the United States Constitution and the United States society. Well, when we dropped the possibility of ranked societies, the only option that was available to us was what we now know today as stratified societies. And we're going to stop and take a break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about the different types of stratified societies, because there are two different types, and we'll talk in particular about the manner in which stratified societies works within our own culture. Alrighty? It is 7:17. Let's take 15. Well, there are two kinds of stratified social systems that we want to talk about, and the first of these has to do with caste. Caste societies, as you find in a place like India in its quintessential form. There is also what we call class society, which is more typical of what we would find here in the US. Now, let's talk about caste societies first. And we'll want to talk about the characteristics associated with caste societies. Caste is always determined at birth. You are born into your caste. One of the significant implications of that is, since you are born into your caste, there is no mobility up or down. If you are born into a low caste, you can go to college, you can win the lotto, you can become a millionaire, you can become a famous hero. You are still a member of your low-level caste. You may not change caste for any reason. Once you're born into that caste, you stay in it no matter what happens in terms of your achievements in life. There is no intermarriage. You marry within your caste, and you may not, under pain of death, violate those caste regulations. Now, as a consequence of this very, very fixed inclusion of you into a specific kind of social strata of society, the rewards then that come to you will be rewards that are caste specific. For instance, when it comes to wealth, it will be determined in respect to such things as your occupation. Occupation is determined by your caste. There are certain castes that are street sweepers. There are certain castes that are leather workers. There are certain castes that are garbage pickers. Your occupation is determined. As a matter of fact, only certain kinds of people could become soldiers because they were part of a warrior caste. When it comes to power issues, your power is determined by the fact that you may not have contact between people of other castes. You exert your power only within the confines of your own caste. And as a matter of fact, higher castes will have greater opportunity to exert power. And prestige will be reinforced by the laws of purity. Now, we're not going to go into a description of the whole caste system in India, but it is a caste system that is determined on the basis of trying to maintain levels of ritual purity. And it is ritual purity that is the major concern of the whole caste system. And it's ritual purity that becomes a significant aspect of the prestige that is given to them. A person from a high caste group in India came to school a number of years ago and was telling us about his pre-conversion days, and he would take a bath 3 times a day and change clothes 3 times a day because it was part of his ritual purity, and he was one of the higher class groups of people. Well, now, how do you handle people who reject the authority of the culture, the social norms, if you would? Dissidents are treated by death or violence. If you violate those rules, they kill you, or they react very, very violently towards you. So caste is a very rigid kind of social organization. Everybody knows their place. The society functions harmoniously in respect to everybody knowing their place. Nobody steps out of that place without being severely punished. And indeed, death for people who step out of those bounds is not at all uncommon. A young couple that tried to get married out of caste were both of them put to death just a few months ago. So it's a continuing process. Now, in contrast to that, we move now to class societies. And we want to talk about class societies, particularly the characteristics that are associated with industrial societies. And I do that because I think it will help us to better picture what a class society is like if we look at our own culture, which is a class society, and it is an industrial society. Now, what are we talking about when we talk about class? There are at least three classes: upper class, middle class, and lower class. And I've used that term. I've talked about how most of us in Biola are middle class people. See? Okay, so we talk about class: upper class, middle class, lower class. What about these class characteristics? Mobility is possible, but it is limited. Mobility is limited. The chances of you moving into the upper classes, the higher classes, are fairly well restricted. If you were born into middle class, that's probably where you'll stay. Now, you might move within that class. You might even get lucky enough to move upward, but it's going to be very limited. There's going to be little chance that you're going to move into high-class society. You might win the lotto. Chances are you'll probably blow your money and end up being just as poor as you are now. My parents were lower middle class. My dad was a mechanic. He was at the lower middle class end. When we moved to California, my mother went to work. He was a mechanic at Mattel Toy Company. She went to work as an assembler on the assembly line. Now all of a sudden we're a two-income family. We moved from lower middle class up to middle class. See? And now, see, the proud heir of our family heritage. You know, I'm a professor, my wife's a teacher, and wow, gollies, we get to move up to upper middle class, see, because we're bringing in two incomes and they're fairly affluent according to middle class standards, but we're still middle class. We have yet to move into upper class, see? And the chances of getting there are fairly remote. Rewards are unequally distributed in a class society. And we've talked about that in the past already. We've talked about how some people become phenomenally rich, and how, as a matter of fact, 10% of the families in the United States control the vast proportion of wealth. As a consequence, the life chances, you know what I mean by life chances? The opportunity for a good education, the opportunity for better employment, the opportunity for success in business is favored for the upper class. What are the chances that you could get into Yale or Harvard or any of the Ivy League schools if you come out of a public school? Not super good. See, you've got to get into the prestigious private schools in order to get the kind of education that will allow you then to transfer into the Ivy League schools. See? And so most of us, we come through the public schools, we get into what we call land-grant colleges or land-grant universities, you know, University of California or one of the state colleges, and we do well with the education that we get, but very few of us are going to make it into Harvard, Yale. That's a different privileged position. And wealth tends to concentrate upwards in class societies. Those who have tend to make a lot more. Wealth tends to accumulate to those who already have it to invest. And prestige is mixed. By that I mean, while it's possible to get a great deal of prestige, there's nevertheless a classification of the prestige that's granted. People who are old money people have more prestige than new money people. Now, Bill Gates is a new moneyed person. And there are certain old moneyed people, like the Rockefeller family, that tolerate the upstarts of the Bill Gates type, because after all, they have proved that they are very, very brilliant, successful individuals, and they can't be excluded. But there's still this tension between old money and new money. There's still this tension between where you got your degree and somewhere else. See? Now, I graduated from the University of California, Santa Barbara. See? A real prestigious school would be University of Chicago, see? Or University of Michigan. See? Now, that's where you need to get your anthropology degree. See? Santa Barbara, it's only number 12 on the list. See? Ah, well, you know, that's a whole lot better than number 50. But there's this educational prestige that's granted, and accomplishments. You know, to be listed in that outstanding Americans volume. See, everybody wants to get into there because that puts you on the who's who list. Well. We try to get this prestige, and we have various ways of acknowledging the prestige. And then, along with this, comes the whole question of power. Now, how does power work in a class society? Frankly, money talks in a class society. Money talks. You can buy social standing. Now, because of this flexibility, which is flexible only within certain parameters, how do we treat people then who violate those standards? What do we do with folk who are dissidents? Well, we marginalize them. We push them to the edges of society. We don't invite you to our particular balls or our particular parties. You don't get invitations to spend the weekend with the rich and the famous. And in marginalizing you socially, we could also marginalize you economically. You will not be invited to participate in certain kinds of business ventures. You will not be participated to engage in certain kinds of enterprises. Or if you're an academic, we can marginalize you academically. Now, a very, very famous anthropologist, he happens to be a Christian. He is the outstanding scholar on hunting and gathering societies. He happens to be the outstanding expert on hunting and gathering society in the Philippines. He has written a number of books on this topic. He has chaired a number of very important meetings. At the AAA meetings, that's the American Anthropological Association meeting, a couple of years ago, he spoke out and expressed his personal opposition to abortion. He has since been blackballed in the academic community because that's not an appropriate topic to talk about. He lost his job at his institution, and he is not being included in any study groups of people who are putting together new books and new studies on hunting and gathering peoples. In spite of his prestige, in spite of his knowledge, see, he's being socially marginalized. That's how we treat dissidents who are not politically correct or socially correct in our society. So we push them. See? We push them to the very margins where they are reminded that they have screwed up. See? So political correctness is a very powerful means of maintaining social behaviors that the rest of the community wants. The other thing that you can do is you can give them a loss of power and status, or loss of power and opportunity. So they are no longer capable of exerting their brand or their perspective on the rest of society. We want people who are in the center of that which is part of what we define as the shared goals and objectives and values of our culture. Well, as a consequence of all of this, I want to draw a conclusion to the nature of class society by noting that racism in America is basically a class struggle. It's a struggle to make sure that blacks or minorities stay in their place, stay in their class. With segregation, it was a caste system. And if you're going to understand the problems that we're facing today with minorities, look at it as a class struggle. A struggle for shared power, a struggle for prestige, a struggle for the shared access to the resources of this country. Well, we want to move beyond talking about stratified societies. We want to move now to talking about the globalization of economies. We want to talk about the economic interdependence of the world in light of the manner in which we have begun to interact as a global village. And I would like to talk about, first of all, the influence of consumerism, as well as the economic interdependence, and the secularism that threatens religion. I would also like to address the matter of continuing economic disparity. Now, we are economically interdependent. There is no question. The economies of Asia begin to collapse, and immediately we begin to wonder what's going to happen to the United States. Now, what is happening in the U.S. as a result of the collapse of economic systems in Asia? All of a sudden, Asian goods are cheaper to manufacture. So all of a sudden, Asian goods can be shipped into our country and be a whole lot cheaper for us to purchase. As a result, balance of payments has seen a flux of dollars going out to buy all those cheap goods to come in, and it's affecting, see, the ability of American businesses to compete with Asian industries. So this is getting them all worried. And of course, money has been invested back and forth in such a phenomenal rate that the question is, are we going to lose money? With the collapse of all these banks, I mean, this is the big question right now, is the collapse of the banks. The whole Indonesian banking system has collapsed. How much money are we going to lose as a result of that, or how much do we need to prop up their banks? How many banks are going to collapse in Korea? How many banks are going to collapse in other Asian countries? I mean, this is the big question now, because as those banks collapse, see, the value of our investments in them will have a tremendous effect, and we can't afford to let some of these collapse. And that's one of the reasons why major funding is going to have to be put into saving some of these. Otherwise, our own economy will suffer very, very, very dramatically. Well, the influence of consumerism. As consumerism begins to go global now, what we're discovering is that the whole world wants the lifestyle that is being touted on global TV and through a consumer society. And this has become such a problem that a country like Indonesia nationalized television in order to take it out of the hands of advertisers. Because what was happening was, when TV was sponsored by TV ads, they would start saying, oh, you've got to have a certain kind of toothpaste. You've got to have a certain kind of soap. You've got to have a certain kind of food. And as they were selling all of these commercial goods, people were saying, yeah, I need those. I can't live without them. But they didn't have the money to buy them. And it was creating a want, a sense of need for stuff that they couldn't afford. And Indonesia decided that the only way that they could maintain some kind of social harmony was to nationalize the TV, pay for the broadcasting out of public funds, and have no advertising except the limited advertising that was good for the nation, which at least that the government said it was good for the nation. So buy toothpaste, see, because they don't want your teeth to rot out. See, but the toothpaste that they advertised, all of those advertisements had to be very, very controlled, had to be talked about in terms of health issues, had to be informative rather than simply competitive. You had to meet real needs, not created needs. And Indonesia has had a very controlling look at television because of its consumeristic influences. Secularism, of course, is a major problem that threatens religious systems, and it's one of the reasons why, for instance, in Islamic countries, there is a very, very great fear of the secularistic tendencies of the Western world. It's one of the reasons why they react so strongly to American culture. Well, the last area that we want to talk about here is the whole area of economic disparity. And I want to spend a bit of time on this because this is a very controversial area in societies and in economic theory. So what I would like to do would be to talk about some theories of world poverty and how these theories of world poverty, which are so totally intertwined with this whole concept of globalization, has resulted in some very real tensions between the Western world and the developing world. And so I would like to talk about the modernization theory, the dependency theory, and the Marxist theory regarding world poverty. All right? So we're going to talk about three theories, all having to do with the causes of world poverty. Because depending on which theory you embrace, will determine then the solution to world poverty. So let's take the modernization theory. Modernization theory has a particular perspective regarding the cause of poverty. The modernization theory says that people are poor because they really aren't working hard enough. There's a failure of effort. They are not open to being creative and innovative. People are poor because they reject science and technology. People are poor, at least in the third world, because they have this fear of competition or innovation. They are people who are locked into their traditional ways of life and they don't want to break out of that. So, as a consequence of these lack of endeavors to do better by themselves, they purposely choose stagnation and the comfort of their traditions. See? They reject modernization. They reject the opportunity to do better by themselves. Now, this is also known as the blame the victim approach to poverty. So what is the answer? If this is the cause of poverty, if this is the analysis that we use, if we're convinced that people choose poverty, then what we've got to do is we've got to come up with a solution for them that will, first of all, promote reform. Okay. Or we'll force change. We'll go in there and we'll make them change. See, we'll stick a gun into their backs and make them go out and plant the crops that we want them to plant. We will threaten to burn down their village if they don't become involved in the timber industry. See, we can force it. Or we could take a more benevolent approach and we can provide more technology or more aid. Okay. We'll go down and we'll give them new equipment, new machinery. We'll give them more vehicles, more trucks. We'll give them more medicine. Okay. We'll put in water pumps or build a dam, whatever. See, we will provide them with the technology that they need to move out of poverty. Or, another great idea, send advisors or teachers. And this was the whole basis, frankly, of the Peace Corps movement of the 1960s. See, the reason that people are poor is because they just haven't had the chance. They haven't had the opportunity. They're locked in their backward ways. What we need to do is send just a whole corps of bright, sharp, well-trained young people who will give them education, instruction, examples, technological aid, see, and we'll march together out of poverty, see. Well, it wasn't a very good idea, and it didn't have a very good success rate, but it was tried. Well, there is another approach to poverty, and that's called the dependency theory. And in the dependency theory, the cause of world poverty is very, very differently analyzed. Instead of being a problem of the people choosing poverty, being ignorant, being comfortable in their old traditional ways, this point of view says the cause of world poverty is really colonialism. It was the colonial powers that did it to us. It was the colonialism that destroyed our traditional cultures. See? Those wretched whiteys came and ruined our culture. It was them that impoverished the third world. It was the colonial powers that came in, see, and took our wealth and our resources, that took their labor and exploited it for their own purposes. As a matter of fact, there was a review. I believe it was in this morning's Orange County Register, although it may have been yesterday. In any case, the last day or two, on a young man from Orange County who went down to Haiti and who started to look into the rebellion of the Maroons against French government, against French colonialism. And in particular, he was looking at one particular man who was brought from the Congo as a slave at the age of 12, already knew how to read and write in Arabic, had already done some writing in Arabic, was a well-educated young lad at the age of 12, was captured, brought over, forced into slavery, and learned how to read and write as a slave, ultimately rebelling against his slave masters and joining up with the Maroons, or the rebel slaves in the mountains, and ultimately leading Haiti to freedom. Well, in the process, of course, he died. But it's a whole very interesting story. And this student, in studying all of this, got a grant of money, put together a video, and it's going to be played on TV next Sunday. And what's the name of it now? I even forget the name of it. But in any case, Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock, KOCE, the Orange County channel. And it's the whole story of the Haitian rebellion against slavery. And one of the things that he says was, he said it was the whole slave system perpetrated by the Europeans that destroyed the wealth of Africa. Now, you want to know something? He's probably right. The slave trade did generate tremendous conflicts and did take several millions of Africa's brightest people and put them into slavery and literally worked them to death. So in talking about this position, I am in some ways affirming that it is a correct analysis. But let's not make a judgment on which is correct. Let's just present them, and we'll deal with them later. The colonial powers are being accused here of destroying traditional cultures, the ability of traditional cultures to meet the needs of their people. The colonial powers are now being accused of impoverishing the third world by taking their labor, their wealth, and grinding poverty in its place. Furthermore, they claim that this continues today as economic colonialism. That now that we are in control of the world's markets, that we put crushing debts upon them for loans that we give to them, and we maintain the market that keeps them in economic servitude to the rest of the world. And so poverty is a colonial conspiracy. As a consequence, we have to ask ourselves, if we take this particular position, what is the answer that we should seek to provide? What is the answer to poverty? The answer is to create national development. See? We'll drive the colonialists out, and we'll create our own national economies. And in developing our own national economies, see, Ford will not be able to build automobiles in our country or sell automobiles in our country unless they partner with a national agency. See? And so there must be a national organization that becomes then the Ford conglomerate in our country. And you will build a car that's Brazilian made or Argentinian made or Indonesian made. See? And the wealth will stay within the country. Or, if you don't want to create a national development, you create a socialist economy. See? And in a socialist economy, the government owns all of the means of production and maintains the wealth in the country. Now, have you picked up who might possibly hold to these 2 points of view? The development model is generally held by what group of people in the world? The Western developed world. And the dependency model has been picked up by what group of people? Third world countries, see, who are saying, our poverty is your fault. And we're saying, your poverty is your fault. See? And we've got two conflicting sets of analysis of the problem. And when we get together for international conferences, the accusations fly. You owe us. You've robbed us, now you owe us. You are wealthy because you took our wealth. Now it's time to pay us back. See? And so if we can't pay back those debts that we owe you, too bad. You robbed us in the first place anyway. And so there's this tremendous tension now between the developed world and the developing world, all over which is the proper assessment of the causes of poverty. And just to tip my hat a little bit here, I think there is a bit of truth on both sides. See? There has been an unwillingness to accept certain kinds of changes. But often there are reasons behind that, because there has been such great uncertainty. And this is where we need to look much, much deeper at the causes of third world poverty. And the third world countries do have a very legitimate complaint against the developed and industrial world, because we do tend to monopolize power and wealth in this country. Well, there is still a third point of view, and we must look at that because it is very popular in some circles, and that is the Marxist theory regarding the cause of world poverty. And while communism has suffered a very serious blow, Marxism continues to be a major theoretical position that is espoused around the globe. And the cause of world poverty, according to Marxist theory, is that it is a class war between the rich and the poor. So they're taking a classical class approach to world systems and saying it's the rich and the poor who are in conflict, and it is the alienation of workers from the means of production. Because the rich have got all of the wealth and they're hoarding it, will not share it equitably or justly with the poor. There is only one answer to poverty. And the answer to poverty, as they are concerned, is that revolution is the answer. Throw off your chains. You have nothing to lose. See? Rise up in rebellion because you've got nothing to lose but those chains. And so revolution, and at the end of the successful revolution, the government then will be will be take over the economic resources, will take over the controls of the society, and they will then be responsible directly back to the workers. As a consequence, it is the government's responsibility then to develop the economic potential of the workers. Now, having looked at these various options, the developmental model, the dependency model, the Marxist model, we have to ask ourselves, what kind of a response does being a Christian promote for us? Is there something unique about a Christian response? And so I would like to talk for a few moments here about a Christian reflection on the whole issue of poverty. How do Christians analyze the whole cause of world poverty? Now, let me suggest that while I am giving this as a Christian reflection, this is not a reflection that is limited only to Christians. There are a lot of serious thinkers who are reflecting on the causes of world poverty who have come up with these same conclusions. But these are conclusions, I think, that we can wholeheartedly embrace. We can note, first of all, that world poverty is being sustained and extended as a result of warfare. War is devastating major sections of the world today. And as a result, people are continually locked into their poverty. Just this morning, Orange County Register again, see, the Sudan, there's a report on the Sudan that says farmers cannot go out and plant their crops, and it's planting season. And they can't go out because war has made it too dangerous for them to go to work in their fields. And if they are not able to plant their crops, see, another year of poverty and hunger and death will rip the Sudan to shreds. Warfare is one of the major causes of world poverty today. A second point that we want to make note of is the fact that corruption is rampant in developing countries, that exacerbates poverty around the globe. The Philippines is a very rich nation. So why are so many people poor in the Philippines? Because the wealth is flowing into the hands of a few ruling families, including Marcos and even the new regime. How many millions of dollars have they squirreled away? That belongs to the nation. Indonesia, same way. Suharto is a mega millionaire. Where did he get all that money? He was nothing but a poor general when he became president. Now he's a mega millionaire. And his family, every one of them are mega millionaires. Where'd that money come from? The wealth of the nation, see, is being sucked into the coffers of a few rich people. And it's outright corruption. The third point that we want to make is that there is massive mismanagement. Massive mismanagement. They're squandering their wealth. They're doing silly things with it. They're not utilizing it to the best purposes. And they are spending it on lavish, ego-building projects. We're going to use millions of dollars to build a huge sports stadium with a statue of me. See? Wonderful. Does this create more wealth? No, it just builds some kind of a stadium that will do nothing to produce, see, more wealth for the people. All it does is create immediate labor. And so there is this tremendous mismanagement. And this is a factor that has been noted widely. But I think we want to note one more characteristic that is peculiar to us as Christians. We want to talk about greed and sin. In point of fact, human sin continues to be a major factor in the continuation of poverty. both personal sin and corporate sin, both personal greed and corporate greed. And so we perpetuate, see, the injustices of our society by this human sin. And so I have to ask ourselves then the question, what is the Christian response to poverty? What can you and I do about poverty? What should we be doing about poverty? And I would like to suggest a few simple little things. First of all, we ought to be championing access to resources. We ought to be speaking up on behalf of people and their need to be able to use what limited resources they've got to create new wealth. And so we ought to be allowing them access to wealth-creating kinds of projects. We need to help them to maximize the wealth of the land, the wealth of their minerals, the wealth of their water, the wealth of their oceans. We also need to work with them in terms of generosity. Generosity to the truly needy. Now, I'm often asked to give some lectures on the Christian and the hungry half as part of the Perspectives course. And when I get to this particular topic, I put down some very, very practical kinds of things that we ought to be doing. And I'm not going to do that in this particular class, but I think we need to be seriously reflecting on what it is that we can be doing as Christians to reach out to folk who are in true need. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't give money to panhandlers. These guys that sit at the intersections, you know, hungry, unemployed, Vietnam vet, God bless you. You know, it's all in a little list, you know. And they're waiting for you to you know, give them some dough on the way past. They may have a genuine need, but I'm not going to encourage that kind of behavior. If I'm going to help the needy, then I want to put it through some kind of a systematic, organized, accountability-oriented organization whereby those people are brought off the streets, see, and they're helped. And I know that the homeless, half of them are people who are fleeing abuse. But standing on a street corner is not going to solve that problem. Getting into some kind of a sanctuary, working with the sheepfold in the city of Orange, for instance, where they have a house where they can bring people in, where they can help them get started again, help them to resolve some of the conflicts that have created their problems. It's a much better investment. See, these are people who are working to help the truly needy, not those who are perennial basket cases. And I passed one just this morning on the way to school. There's a gal, and she is absolutely out of her mind. She has wandered the streets of Anaheim for years. See? And she was standing on the street corner just 2 blocks from Disneyland, bare feet, dancing. She's got her little cart that she pushes around, and she was throwing herself down and jumping up and leaping over her cart, and she was just going through this exotic dance of hers. And the woman really needs to be hospitalized. Unfortunately, our legal system, our mental care system is so screwed up that there's not enough love that we can do. So she continues to walk the streets, okay, carrying out all this bizarre behavior, talking to who knows who as she goes past you. And I've watched her for 2 years now. Okay. Now, how do I help a woman like this? Not by walking up and giving her money. Okay. The woman needs psychiatric help. Okay. Somehow or another, family or somebody going to have to become involved in her life to get her off the streets and get her into the help that she needs. And obviously onto the medication that will control these fits. But how do we do this? How do we help the truly needy? And what is responsible stewardship? It seems to me that we ought to be involved in some kind of responsible stewardship of the resources that have been given to us. If we are in businesses, to use our business funds wisely. To use them responsibly as children of God. And to turn that money then into ways that will carry forward the kingdom objectives of our God. And it seems to me that we ought to move into the area of support for righteousness and justice. Support for righteousness and justice. These are the major characteristics of a godly people. And we can sit down and we can figure out how to handle this individually, how to handle this corporately as organizations in which we have significant amounts of money that we need to give away, or we can deal with it in terms of church bodies, church groups. See? And one of the things I like to challenge people to do is what do you intend to do with the resources that God's given to you? See? Individually, later in a church community, or in a church community, or when you get into some kind of a corporation, if you start your own business or work with a business, how can you use the resources of your corporation to help third world developing countries, to help impoverished people in our own country, to further the kingdom goals, see, of Jesus Christ? These, I think, are the kinds of questions that we ought to be asking ourselves, because we do live in a global society. And if we do not act responsibly with the wealth that God has given to us, see, then we will stand in judgment, or under God's judgment, for our inability to use that wealth. Well, these are our observations regarding social organization, regarding the manner in which society seeks to guide our behaviors. And we have concluded, see, with some reflections on how we ought to be looking, see, to Jesus Christ as the one who guides our behaviors, and in particular, the use of our resources as we stand accountable before the whole world. Alrighty, with that, we'll come to a conclusion. We'll let you go, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week when we talk about, what's next week? Next week. Oh, we're going to talk about religion next week.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.